Not all of Chuck Todd's interview with Donald Trump was able to fit into the confines of Meet the Press. We have more tonight. That best interview yet of candidate Trump. It actually turned downright psychiatric at one point, with Dr. Todd trying to get the evasive patient to look inward.
Hey, I went to the Wharton School of Finance. I was a really good student. It's probably the hardest school.
I've never heard you say anything about Wharton before.
Huh?
I've never heard you say that about
I'm
Wharton.
proud of the school. You know why? It's a great school.
Let me ask you.
Some of the greatest business minds in the world.
I understand. So why do you feel it's important to tell us that all the time?
I'll tell you why. Because everybody knows what a great school it is. Everybody knows that to get into Wharton is probably the hardest school to get into. It's, you know, right there, you know, within a couple of
Ivy League, no question.
You have to be very smart. If you're a conservative Republican, you go in. Look, if I were a liberal Democrat, people would say I'm the super genius of all time. The super genius of all time. If you're a conservative Republican, you got to fight for your life. It's really an amazing thing. And let me tell you, they're plenty smart, and they're really smart.
But I guess I go back to, why do you have to tell us all the time that you went to Wharton? People know you're successful.
No,
they see you're successful. They assume you're smart.
They know it's a great business school.
Why do you have to say it?
We need business genius in this country. We need it. We can't have continuously bad trade deals with China, with Japan, with Mexico. I mean, Mexico's killing us. Mexico's killing us in trade, killing us at the
How are they killing us? The peso is worth less today than it was even 5 years ago.
And so they went on about the peso. On Sunday, when most of that interview aired on Meet the Press, two op-ed pieces in the New York Times made psychiatric references to Donald Trump. Timothy Egan's column, entitled "The Junk Politics of 2015, said, "Normal politics can't explain Trump. For that, you need Freud. Trump fits the classic definition of narcissistic personality disorder." And in her column, Maureen Dowd included this account of her interview with Donald Trump. Quote, "I tell Trump he has transcended the level of narcissism common in a profession full of narcissists. I ask if he was always like this, boasting that he had the best baby food and the best high chair. Honestly, I don't think people change that much," Trump said. "I'm a solid, stable person." Knocking on the wooden restaurant wall, he added, "I am a man of great achievement. I win, Maureen. I always win. Knock on wood, I win. It's what I do. I beat people. I win." No insecurities? "I don't know how you would define insecurity as it pertains to me," he replies. Joining us now, two people who can define insecurity as it pertains to Donald Trump. Clinical psychologist Joe Burgo joins us from Denver, Colorado. He is the author of the upcoming book, The Narcissist You Know. And Jeffrey Kluger, editor-at-large for Time Magazine and author of The Narcissist Next Door. Joe Burgo, let's begin with Chuck Todd's question. Why does he have to keep telling us he went to the Wharton School and that he's very smart?
Well, extreme narcissists like Donald Trump view the world exclusively in terms of winners and losers, and they feel constantly compelled to demonstrate their winner status and at the same time to triumph over those losers that they despise. So it's a way of escaping and disproving a sense of inferiority or a defect that lies below the surface.
Jeffrey Kluger, it's as if we have X-rays of the Trump case here. There's this tweet that Josh Groban put to music where he says, "Sorry, losers and haters, but my IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. Please don't feel so stupid or insecure. It's not your fault."
Well, and this is what I've said about Trump. For all narcissists, there's a certain grandiosity, there's a certain entitlement, there's a sense of a lack of empathy. But with Trump, as in all things with Trump, it's a question of scale. There's the largeness of Trump, the loudness of Trump, the great brain Trumpness of Trump. But there's a smallness too, a pettiness, a petulance, a certain resort to schoolboy taunts. The very fact that he calls his opponents stupid, that he uses terms like total loser. These are very juvenile
And this is all
terms.
symptomatic of narcissism.
It's symptomatic of the brittleness of narcissism, because one thing to keep in mind about narcissism is that it's often what psychologists call the mask model of narcissism. It's a sense of profound grandiosity that's designed to cover up its exact opposite, a profound insecurity, even a self-loathing in some people. So anything that fractures that mask leaves the narcissist very vulnerable, and I think we're seeing this in Trump's case.
Joe Burgo, you've drawn the connection between narcissism and our politics now. You wrote, Trump's narcissism actually constitutes a large part of his appeal to certain voters. Could you explain that?
Sure. Well, if you're the sort of voter who is anxious about his economic future, worried about his social status in a world that's constantly changing, that is, if you're afraid of being a loser in this highly competitive world we live in, Trump models a kind of way out. You can become indignant and you can vent it in the Twitter sphere. You can blame those stupid politicians for what's wrong with our world, and you can treat anybody who challenges your self-esteem with mockery and contempt. So he kind of, he offers a model for how you can escape from your insecurities.
And Jeffrey, you wrote in your piece that his feuds with Rosie O'Donnell, with Robert De Niro, the insulting, hasn't limited his insults to Rosie O'Donnell, to Megyn Kelly, that is all an example of his insecurity based in this narcissism.
Well, that's exactly right. And Megyn Kelly is a very good example, because a person who is comfortable in his or her own skin would have been able to say, look, I honestly wasn't referring to hormones when I talked to Megyn Kelly, but I can understand why people thought that. And I wish I had chosen a better word, but I truly didn't I truly didn't mean it. But for Trump, even to concede the few inches of ground that would have suggested that he phrased his sentence improperly or ineffectively was too much, because if you must stand constant guard over your ego, over your self-esteem, you can afford to give no quarter.
And Joe Burgo, what then do you expect of this candidacy if it has a kind of psychological direct connection to populism? What do you expect? Where do you expect it to go from here?
Well, it's hard to imagine the leader of the Western world being someone who can't tolerate criticism, who becomes indignant and blaming and contemptuous when his views are challenged, who can't compromise, who always has to have his way. Your earlier guests were talking about Trump reaching his levels of popularity, and I think that for thinking people, they're going to see that this is not a man who you could really trust to lead our country.
And Jeffrey, there's this great passage you have in here about the Trump name and how it's everywhere on his buildings. You say the Trump name is everywhere in the Trump world, and there's a reason for that. You can look at something you've built with quiet pride and know it's yours, or you can look at it worriedly, insecurely, fretting that someone, somewhere, may not know that you created it.
Well, that's right. And it reminds me of a great line from Death of a Salesman when Willie Loman's neighbor is going to argue before the Supreme Court. And Willie says, "Why haven't you told me about that?" And his answer is, "I'm going to do it. I don't have to talk about it." That's a secure person.
Jeffrey Kluger and Joe Burgo, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I have friends who work in this field who've been saying for weeks now they're just watching this classic case on TV. And I have to say they're kind of enjoying it since they don't have to treat this patient. Again, Jeffrey Kluger and Joe Burgo, thank you very much for joining us. Coming up,